Attorney Dan Horowitz is someone familiar to all of us, of course, a guest commentator here on Court TV, tragically is the husband of a murder victim. In August, 16-year-old Scott Dulesky was convicted of killing Dan's wife, Pamela. But now, Dan has been hired by the family of another 16-year-old. Andrew Mantas is charged with beating his own mother to death with an aluminum baseball bat. Tonight, with the accused teen killer, Dan is here in his first national TV interview, and with him, San Francisco Chronicle reporter Henry Lee, who's covering this latest teen tragedy. Also, criminal defense attorney Paula Canny, who's a close friend and colleague of Dan's. I want to start with Henry, because Henry, you can sort of objectively, what has your reporting discovered? Take us through the crime.
Well, a couple weeks ago, Andrew Mantas allegedly hit his mother in the head repeatedly with a baseball bat in their home they shared in Danville, which is in Contra Costa County. It's a well-to-do town in Contra Costa. He did report hearing voices, believed that he was possessed by demons. He went to his church the weekend before he allegedly did this, and now he is facing a murder charge as an adult, Catherine. All
right, the parents were going through a divorce. Any word from family members, others? Did this seem to exacerbate his problem? Was there a long-standing history with this kid of mental problems?
Well, the alleged mental problems evinced themselves at least in the week before this happened. In fact, 3 days before the homicide, Andrew Mantas' parents' divorce was finalized. The couple had been married for about 20 years. In the few days before this homicide, Andrew went to a neighbor's house, knocked, tried the door many times, tried to get in, told the neighbor that he had received phone calls to go into the house. Of course, he had no permission to do that. Then, of course, he visited the Greek Orthodox Church in Oakland with his mother and said that he had been hearing voices. So a lot of the mental issues were made known to us just shortly before the homicide.
Right, and I understand she was found about 1:30 a.m. Who found her?
We know that a number of neighbors in this very quiet townhouse complex repeated hearing noises at about that time. They called the police. Police surrounded the area, and shortly after that, they did find Andrew Mantas at a golf riding an allegedly stolen golf cart about 3 hours after this killing.
All right, he had a knife with him, but that apparently had nothing to do with the case, the murder case?
That's right. The baseball bat was found at the crime scene, at the house.
All right, Dan, you know, there are a lot of people that would be surprised, think it was difficult for you, even say, well, maybe this is, this is a great defensive move on the part of this young man's family to hire you, because standing in front of a jury, jurors might think he would never represent a 16-year-old capable of beating a woman to death, particularly his own mother.
Well, Catherine, you know, the entire family, Demetra, his mother's brother and sister, they're all behind me representing Andrew, and I'm doing it without charge. I'm doing it free. And the reason that I can represent him is that although the act itself is so horrible, it's indescribably terrible, the reasons behind this young man, what made this young man get to this point, are so different from the type of act where there's a deliberate, brutal, almost joyful killing. Here it's just the opposite. Andrew and his mother worked together to try to cure Andrew of these voices, of his problems, and they failed. But they failed together, and he is in such deep pain. He is mourning. He's in such excruciating pain upon hearing of his mother's death, and yet so out of our world as we know it. It's just a terrible, pathetic, tragic case, and he needs help.
What sort of history have you uncovered? Whether I know they're doing toxicology tests. I don't know if you've gotten any drug reports yet, but psychological history, treatment history, this kind of thing.
Okay, now I'm early to the case, Catherine. I got in on it when I was on vacation. I've met with him about 12 hours. But they did a CAT scan yesterday at the psychiatric hospital. We didn't ask for it. The doctor said, we want to do a CAT scan. So they're looking for very deep-rooted physiologic damage or injury to his brain. They know there's something wrong. And yes, there are toxicology tests that the police ordered. You know, Catherine, this is a case where I believe that the police, the prosecutors, and my office will work together to really understand what happened to Andrew. Not every case is completely adversarial. There are cases where you can cooperate.
Well, I read a quote from someone in the DA's office that there's fairly significant indication that the boy suffered from a mental disorder that will be revealed more clearly as the case progresses. So it does, I mean, they haven't said it raises to the level of a legitimate insanity defense, but that's pretty surprising because we don't hear that early on from DAs very often.
And yet it's their job because they're supposed to do justice. They're supposed to accomplish justice. And the law allows this young man to be punished the same as a cold-blooded, deliberate murderer who enjoyed what he did. And it's up to my office and the prosecutors to find out whether he fits that horrible mold or whether he's a sick, injured, pathetic person who did a horrific thing. And they have to be treated differently. One person has to be punished in a far different manner than somebody who's ill.
Well, they've already, though, said they're seeking adult murder charges. That seems to be a very aggressive action, while balanced, on the other hand, with this sort of mediating point of view.
True, but think about it from their point of view. They've got a horrific murder, and they can't just, without a full set of facts, just say, okay, we know he's mentally ill, treat him like a juvenile, and let him get out when he's 23 years old. They have to be much more cautious than that, and I wouldn't expect them to act in any manner different than that. I know Hal Jewett, obviously, very well. I trust him, and I trust Dan Cabral.
He prosecuted Pamela's murder, for heaven's sakes.
Right, and I know how honest and how straightforward he was in his handling of that. So he'll be the same way in this case, and I think we'll work well together. Him and Dan Cabral, his entire office, I think, will look at this case from a very objective, professional standpoint. And my job is to get this young man tested, have real doctors look at him, not people who are paid to give an opinion, but people who are straight down the line, and then come to a truth as to what's wrong with him.
All right, Paula, what do you think about this? Because for the DA to come out pretty quickly and say, fairly significant indication he suffered from a mental disorder, and yet, you know, we're still hearing the voices sort of came about in the last week. Maybe there's a bit more of a history, but that's a pretty significant statement from the DA's office.
Well, I think it is a significant statement, but they made it because it's true. There's absolutely no question that Andrew is suffering from some kind of intense mental disorder. I don't know what it is. I don't believe he's had a diagnosis because he wasn't allowed to avail himself. I know that he was taken to several hospitals who simply discharged him. So as Dan is saying, he hasn't really received appropriate treatment because he hasn't really been given the appropriate diagnosis. So having heard voices and all the people having heard that, you know, Andrew heard voices, of course the DA's office has to acknowledge that which is true. What is disturbing to me is the quick decision to prosecute him as an adult. He's been in a mental hospital until I think probably last night. So, you know, the DA's office, the district attorney's office, is clearly taking a very aggressive position. And that's what, you know, that is what they do. Dan is, you know, being the consummate and conciliatory, hoping they can work together. But it's like, I don't mean to be jaded, but I am a little bit. But DA's office's job oftentimes are to, you know, get prosecutions and to prosecute as an adult when
but doesn't it protect their alternatives? I mean, basically, they can go for the highest charge. They can always back off. They can always plead this out. They can always drop it back down again.
Well, I agree, but that's true. That is true, but it's like they've already set in motion this system to go as an adult seeking first-degree murder, and when they could at this juncture say we don't have enough information to decide how best to proceed. And you know, that's probably the way that I would prefer that they had done it. But, you know, I'm not a DA anymore.
No, but you're a commentator extraordinaire.
Thank
you
you
very much, Paula. Dan Horowitz, Henry Lee. Now, when we come back, Colorado teacher accused of having